Shabbat shalom. I've been thinking all week about this baffling verse in the book of Proverbs. Im ra'ev sonecha ha'achileu lechem. If your enemy is hungry, feed him bread. Ve'im tzameh hashkeu mayim. And if your enemy is thirsty, give him water. If your enemy is hungry, feed him. If your enemy is thirsty, give him water to drink. Now, the biblical book of Proverbs is a brilliant advice book, the ancient equivalent of the self-help industry of today, although much more profound. Proverbs claims to have been written by King Solomon. Whether this is true or not, and scholars tell us that this is not true, the fact that Jewish tradition attributed Proverbs to Solomon indicates the extent of our tradition's love of and veneration for this book. King Solomon in Jewish tradition was the most brilliant man in the history of the world, endowed by God with the miraculous gifts of intellect and moral insight. In Jewish tradition, you could take Solomon's advice to the bank. The book of Proverbs is part of what is now called wisdom literature. That is, if we learn the age-old wisdom of the past and use our innate powers of reasoning to apply such wisdom to contemporary circumstances, we will know what to do and what to avoid in our daily dilemmas. We will be able to intuit both the moral and the utilitarian expectation. We will do or refrain from doing both what is in our self-interest as well as what is expected of us morally. If your enemy is hungry, give him food. If your enemy is thirsty, give him water. Why? Why give your enemy who wants to kill you food that will sustain him as he will continue to try to kill you? The Hebrew word is soneh, the one who hates you. He hates you. The whole point of fighting an enemy is to defeat him. Why is it your moral responsibility, or why is it even in your self-interest to water and feed him? He might have died of his own accord had it not been for your intervention. Isn't that the point, to kill your enemy? He started this war in the first place. The reason I've been thinking about this bit of wisdom from the Proverbs is that Israeli newspapers revealed that the ailing wife of Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas was admitted to a hospital near Tel Aviv and had surgery this week. Why give the wife of your opponent, bitter opponent, medical attention? They have hospitals in Palestinian cities. It's just that Israeli hospitals are better. And all this transpired during the very week that 3 Israeli teenagers were kidnapped in the West Bank. While Abbas is against the kidnapping, still, the terrorists came from territory controlled by Abbas's Palestinian Authority. And if you say that Abbas is the leader of the Palestinian Authority that has recognized Israel and on the spectrum of Israel haters is hardly at the top or near the top, how then do you explain that Israel has provided life-saving medical treatment to family members of Hamas? Earlier this month, Israel allowed the transfer to Jerusalem for cancer treatment of the mother-in-law of Hamas leader, Ismail Haniyeh. Last November, Israeli doctors treated Haniyeh's baby granddaughter for a serious digestive tract infection. It was such a serious condition Sadly, the girl eventually died. Hamas is a terrorist entity sworn to destroy the state of Israel. While Israeli doctors were struggling to save his granddaughter, Haniyeh himself has said, "The gun is our only response to the Zionist regime. No compromise should be made with the enemy. This is the generation of the missile, the tunnel, and the suicide operations." The Hamas charter is committed not only to the destruction of Israel, but to the murder of Jews everywhere. That's you. The day of judgment will not come about until Muslims fight Jews and kill them. Then the Jews will hide behind the rocks and the trees, and the rocks and the trees will cry out, "O Muslim, there is a Jew hiding behind me. Go and kill him." Why give life-sustaining treatment to these bitter enemies and morally compromised foes? Israel's enemies asked for and received permission to cross into Israel. Their hatred of Israel neither prevented them from asking for Israel's help or prevented Israel from providing this help. And Israeli hospitals willingly gave care, notwithstanding that if their enemies had the opportunity, they would have killed these very doctors who were treating their loved ones. So I ask you again, what is the reason that King Solomon, the most brilliant man who ever lived, advised us to help keep alive our starving enemies, sonenu, those who hate us? From a moral perspective, I think that there is an applied abhorrence in the Bible to use food and water as a weapon. There is something just morally wrong about starving an enemy to death, something that goes against the very nature of things. All of us are in such basic and urgent daily need of food and water. We are so dependent on them and so vulnerable that there is something inhuman about denying these to anyone, any human being. Food and water come from God. They are provided to us by God. They are not ours to withhold. Jewish tradition refers to Jews as Rachmanim b'nei Rachmanim, merciful ones, the children of the merciful ones. We cannot simply stand by as another, even our enemy, dies of starvation, thirst, or some medical condition that could have been treated. We cannot fail to respond, especially if our enemy asks, pleads, to save his life, or the life of his child or loved one. His behavior towards you should not be the standard of your behavior towards him. But aside from the morality of it all, how does offering food and water, and in our day, medical attention, serve our best interests? I think the answer is in the second verse in the Proverbs. Ki gechalim ata chote al rosho. Feed him and give him water, because you will be heaping burning coals on his head. It's a very hard verse to understand. But one traditional interpretation to heaping live coals on your enemy's head is that you will cause him to burn up with shame. In other words, while there may be a role for warfare, the best way to resolve conflict is by recognizing the humanity of the other, even the humanity of your enemy. And when you do so, it might cause in him shame that he regarded you in the first place with such hatred. Even beyond the moral issue, the Proverbs are suggesting that we have a utilitarian self-interest to give food and water, and in our day, medical attention to our enemy. When you show kindness to your enemy, when you save his life, when you are the reason that he is still alive after fighting so hard to kill you, he might be so shamed by his implacable enmity towards you that he will moderate, or perhaps even turn from his ways, and in turning, recognize the humanity in you. He might come to believe that all this time he was fighting a phantom, a myth, a caricature of you, but not you. And this is victory. It is the victory of the truly strong. Ezehu Gibor, who is strong? Asked the rabbis. Misha oses soneh ohavo, one who turns an enemy into a friend. One who turns sin'ah, hatred, into ahava, love. Raging hatred is so difficult to extinguish. We cannot kill all of our enemies. The most effective way to reduce enmity, according to the Proverbs, is to douse your enemy's hatred with burning coals, that by your kindness, compassion, and humanity towards him, you cause him to feel embarrassed and shamed by his enmity towards you. Judaism is not a pacifistic philosophy. We recognize that sometimes the only effective and moral option is to take up arms. But in the long run, we can only reconcile differences and bring lasting peace by recognizing the very humanity in others that we recognize in ourselves. By acting kindly, by recognizing the basic human needs that we all have and addressing those needs, we might generate a turn of heart, a grudging respect, or perhaps even affection. In acting humanely towards your enemy, you might bring out of him his own humanity. And it is only this that can bring true and lasting peace.